If you would this morning, let's turn over to Ruth chapter 1, please. Ruth chapter 1. Ruth is a book that if you ask most people, most Christians about, they will tell you it's a beautiful love story, and it is. They'll tell you about it's a great lesson for women to study, and I'd argue it's a great lesson and a great book for men and women to study. It has a great many lessons in it. It has lessons about Gentiles being grafted into the Lord's plan and into the plan of salvation and into the lineage of Christ. It has great lessons about faith and perseverance and love. And oftentimes, the passage that Ruth says to her mother-in-law, Naomi, is one that is often even quoted at weddings. But there's a lesson in Ruth that kind of starts out in chapter 1 and kind of, for the most part, sticks to the background, but I think it's one that is important, and I believe it is also one that is timely for all of us, and that is a lesson of how do we handle loss? How do we handle when it feels like not just death, although death is going to be the primary focus. How do we handle when we lose loved ones or when the world around us seems to be crumbling? How do we handle that as a follower of God? And I think Naomi is a great lesson, especially Naomi and Ruth, but Naomi especially is a great lesson in this on what's to do that's right, what's to do that's wrong, and what can we do of helping those that are around us that are going through loss and are going through suffering. It's just by way of brief recap for those of you that haven't read the book or it's been a while since you've read it. Let's go through what Naomi's lost in a matter of a few short years. In Ruth chapter 1, beginning in verse 1, now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land. Certain men in Bethlehem in Judah went to dwell in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. So time picks up with Naomi and her family before they even moved to Moab, and that's where they would meet Ruth and get married and have a life started there. But picks up here with a famine hitting the land, and Naomi has to leave with her husband and her 2 sons. They're home. She leaves her home, she leaves her people, she leaves everything that she's probably ever known and has to go to a foreign land to be able to survive this famine. They have to go where the food is, and so they leave. It's a pretty world-shaking event for most people to completely leave your country, even more so, I think, to some degree at this time, that you leave really your people. The Moabites won't even speak your same language for the most part. There's a huge upheaval in her life that everything she knows is gone, except for her husband and her 2 sons. But unfortunately, give it a little bit of time later, beginning in verse 2, the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi. The name of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, the Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to the country of Moab and remained there. Then Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. A little bit of time passed, and she loses her spouse, and for anyone, they can agree, that is a crushing loss to lose someone that is probably the closest person to you on this planet. Even more so now that she's moved to a different country, she's lost her home, she's lost most of her friends. In many ways, she's starting over, and now she's lost her spouse. But at least she has her 2 sons until it goes a couple years later in verse 4. Now they took wives of the women of Moab. The name of one was Orpah, and the other's name was Ruth. And they dwelt there about 10 years. Then both Mahlon and Chilion also died. So the woman survived her 2 sons and her husband. So here she is where we pick up and where we're going to spend the majority of our time this lesson, beginning there in verse 6 in just a moment. Naomi has gone to a foreign country. She's lost her home. She's lost her people. She's lost her husband. And now she's lost her 2 sons. Sometimes it's not just one loss that gets to us. Sometimes it's an accumulation of things. Even though it's probably been about a decade since she's moved here, lost her husband, and lost her sons, and all of these things have happened, time passes by pretty quickly, and sometimes it can seem like one thing on top of another, on top of another, on top of another, that you can understand some of Naomi's grief that we're going to be seeing here over the next few verses. She's dealing with a great level of loss and suffering in her life. But she does give us some good lessons here, beginning in verse 6, of how to start to overcome that. Beginning in verse 6, then she arose, that being Naomi, with her daughters-in-law, and she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab, that the Lord had visited his people by giving them bread. Therefore she went out from that place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. Naomi hears, even all the way over in the country of Moab, that while it feels like everything is crashing around her, God is still around. God is still helping people. God is still blessing you. God is still blessing the world around us. And that's an important thing to remember when we are dealing with loss and when we feel abandoned and we feel like we don't know where to turn. Where some days I imagine it's just hard to even get up in the morning because I don't know what's going to happen or what I'm going to do. She hears good news that does strengthen her to a small degree. Her family, her friends, her loved ones, her neighbors back home in Judah haven't been abandoned. God is still there. The famine has come to an end. God is still working with their people. There's food again. Life has started over. Life has continued. God not only blesses them, God still blesses me. Verse 8, Naomi continues saying, and said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go return each of you to her mother's house, and let the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me." We'll see some things about Naomi that she has a bad attitude towards the end of this lesson, but at least in this moment, she's not completely lost God. She's not completely forgotten that God exists, and she's still wishing good upon her daughters-in-law that you go home, start a new family, return to your father's house, go try and start a new family. Let the Lord bless you and deal kindly with you. That's not that God has abandoned everyone. It's not that God hates everyone, as some people have taken grief and taken it to the extreme there, that they blame God for everything, and that God abandons everyone. She's still wishing good for her daughters-in-law. She still loves them dearly and wants them to continue in their life, and that God to still be a part of it. It's also important when it comes to learning to overcome loss and suffering that we take time to mourn. Verse 9, that the Lord may grant you, and that the Lord grant you that you may find rest, each in the house with her husband. And she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. There's a mourning, I think, to some degree, yes, that they're separating from each other and they're weeping there. But I think there's also a part of this that it's still this continuing process of mourning that we don't know how long it's been going on, but it's been going on for some time. To lose a husband, to lose a father-in-law, to lose sons, to lose your own husbands, that there's been mourning, I'm sure, for years here on the household. A loss of a family member, loss of loved ones don't ever fully go away. The pain to some degree still lingers. It still hangs around, and there's some weeping there, not just that now Naomi is leaving and we don't know if we'll see her again, but there's pain knowing that the reason partly that she's going back is that she has no man in her life to help take care of her. In a very patriarchal society, she needs to go back to her people and be around whatever family members and stuff that she has left. She needs to go back and be in her country with her people where her same language is spoke, where her God is worshipped. And so there's a separation here of not just loved ones now that have separating, but the loved ones that are left behind are going to be separated. Some conversations go on and some arguments go back and forth over whether or not the daughter should return, and Orpah decides to stay behind, and Ruth gives her speech about wherever you go, I will go, wherever you stay, I will stay. I'm coming with you, and essentially I won't be taking no for an answer. If you leave me, I'm just going to follow you. Somewhat reluctantly, but it does eventually happen at the end of that. When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her. Now, I don't believe that she stopped speaking to her because she's angry and that Ruth is just being pushy and she doesn't like it. She stopped speaking to her, I think, is the idea, and some translations have worded it this way. She stopped arguing with her. Okay, if you're going to follow me, if you're going to go with me, if you are determined, who am I to stop you? You're not going to take no for an answer. You see, and Ruth sees, that Naomi is dealing with a great number of losses here in the last decade, that she is really hurting, and Ruth says, I am not going to leave you. Whether you like it or not, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to help you. There's a level there when it comes to overcoming loss that I'm very much this type of personality, and my wife discovered this early on in our marriage when I lost my father. I'm the type of personality that when I'm mourning and when I'm suffering and when I'm hurting, I kind of want to withdraw from the world and with everybody. There's a level there that Not only I need this lesson, I think we all need this lesson of times, that there's a willingness that we need to be willing to accept help. That there are people, there are family, there are brethren around us that want to help, that are there to help, that are begging to help and comfort and mourn with us and be there for us. That yes, it is important that we take time to mourn and be by ourselves. I believe that is part of the grieving process, that we do need time by ourselves, but we also need people around us. I can't, or we can't, let ourselves be so withdrawn that we just let that grief get worse and worse and that we don't let people in. Otherwise, that's going to stick around far longer than it needs to. And so the question comes up when friends and loved one of ours lose loved ones, when they are going through loss. The question that always comes up and the question that I've always asked is, how can I help? I ask that because I've undergone it myself and I know it's not easy. I ask that because everyone goes through loss differently and everyone deals with it differently. Everyone has different needs. And I ask that because I genuinely care about folks. I think the first thing, first and foremost, to quote Solomon that we read in Ecclesiastes not too long ago, is to weep with those who weep. The passage that we read a few moments ago in Ruth chapter 1 and verse 9, she kissed them, they lifted up their voices, and they wept. Orpah and Ruth do not seem to me as daughter-in-laws that were so callous that when their mother-in-law lost her husband, they didn't go comfort her or didn't sit with her or didn't care about her. They don't seem like daughter-in-laws that is, you see, evident in the passage, that as soon as their husbands die, and there's no continuing family, they didn't have any children up until this point, they didn't just abandon her and go, well, we're going back home, bye, see you later, maybe we'll see you again. They genuinely cared about their mother-in-law. They are those that wept with her. They mourned and cried and hurt with her for their own losses and for her losses. There's an importance in being there for folks, whether it's at the funeral or whether it's going to visit them. It's writing cards, it's giving a call, it's a text, it's letting people know that I'm hurting for you, and I'm hurting with you. The number of losses we've dealt with in the last 6 months here, to let families know that whether they were people we knew dearly or whether they were people that we knew by name only. I've gone to many funerals I didn't know the person that died. I've driven states for people that I didn't know who were in the casket, but I knew loved ones that were there mourning a loss. And in whatever way I could, if I had the time, if I had the opportunity, I would drive, I would be with them. If not, I'd call, I'd send a text, I'd send flowers. I'd do what I can to let them know I'm with you. I'm mourning with you. I want to help however I can. To let them know I'm going to offer to be here for you however we can. Verse 10, the argument starts. They said to her, that being Orpah and Ruth, surely we will return with you to be with your people. They put the offer out there, and I think a little bit more than put an offer out there, they kind of argued with her for some time that no, we're going to go with you. You can't make us go back to our family. You are our family now. You are in more need of us than our family is. We don't know how big their extended family was there in Moab, but they were genuinely concerned and caring about Naomi. They said, we're going to be going with you back to your home. There's an offer there that needs to be extended, that we need to let people know, not just, well, they know I'm around. If they need me, they'll call. I need to put myself out there. You need to put yourself out there for loved ones and let them know I am here. What can I do? What can I do to help? How can I help? And when they, like Naomi, refuse help, sometimes they're angry, sometimes they're hurting, sometimes they don't know what to do. Be lovingly and patiently persistent with offering that help. Verse 16, I think we see a great example of this in Ruth. But Ruth said, entreat me not to leave you, or turn back from following after you. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you from me." When she saw that she was determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her. There's a balance here that needs to be struck that is sometimes very hard. I'm the type of person that immediately I want to fix something. If I know there's a problem, I want to fix it. And my wife, when I've gone through things, is similar personality that I think a lot of us are. What can I do to fix it? What can I do to help? What can I do to take the pain away? What can I do to stop the pain and the suffering and the hurt that is going on now? I want the easy equation that takes away the pain from loved ones. And more often than not, it's not that simple. Grief is not a 2 + 2 = 4 type of situation that, okay, if I do X, Y, and Z, everything's gone, everything's taken care of, there's nothing to worry about. Grief has never been like that for anyone. And so there's a balance that needs to be struck here. That one, I don't become a pest. That I don't become pushy. That I don't insist, here's how to fix it, here's how to make it better, just let me do this for you. I don't care how much you ignore me, I don't care how much you hate me, I don't care how much you don't want me to do this. I'm going to be here and I'm going to do it. There's a side there that becomes unloving if we get that far. That we start doing things because we feel like we need to or we want to or we think we had the solution. And again, grief isn't that simple. Don't become so pushy that we go beyond what we should be doing, or we stop listening when people are trying to tell us what they need or what they want, and we ignore it. That's not being patient and lovingly persistent with help. It's being a bull in a china shop that's just running through and doing what you want to do and not what others need. But when I read this, that's not the attitude I see from Ruth. I see an attitude from Ruth who simply said, "Where you go, I will follow. Whatever you need, wherever you need me, I'm going to be there and you can't stop me. If you go, I'm just going to sit beside you. Even if I'm just going to sit there and be quiet, I'm just going to go and I'm going to be with you. If you go back home into your home in Moab, I'm going to go and I'm going to be there and I'm just going to sit there and I'm going to be there with you. If you go back to your home in Israel, I'm going to follow you. You can't stop me there. I'm going to be around, and when you need help, I'm going to give it to you. I'm not leaving you. But I'm also going to give you the space that you need to mourn. I'm also going to let you make your own decisions. If you think going back to Israel is the best choice, then okay, I'll just follow you. Sometimes loved ones and friends are going through something and they don't know what to say. They don't know what they need. They need that time alone, and it's good that they have this time alone, but I'm also going to check up on them. I'm also going to help where I can. I'm going to be around them. I'm going to do what I can. Ruth didn't insist on how to immediately fix the problem. I don't think Ruth knew how, because it's not that easy. Ruth was going through her own problems of grief, I'm sure. Even in the middle of her own grief, which can cause us to do and say some horrible things, still was concerned about her mother-in-law and said, "No, wherever you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die. I'm going to stay with you in whatever way I can." And she does just that. You can see it throughout the rest of the account of Ruth, and we won't go into that this morning for the sake of time. But Ruth there too in verse 2 I think is a great example. So after they've gone home and they've met with family and they've met with loved ones, and Naomi has seen old friends and family and neighbors that are around, Ruth moves in with her, and verse 2 of chapter 2 begins, "So Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, 'Please let me go into the field and glean heads of grain after him, in whose sight I may find favor.'" One of the ways that at the time in Israel that a widow could take care of herself and get food was to go and glean the harvest and pick up what was dropped on the ground. If it was dropped on the ground in harvest, it was supposed to be left. The outside edges of the field were supposed to be left alone, that the widows and children and stranger could go and glean. They could go take grain and fruit or whatever else the harvest might be. The outside of that's supposed to be left alone so that they could take care of themselves. So Ruth said, Naomi, you don't need to go out there. You don't need to do this. You stay home. You grieve. You're older. Whatever you need to do, I'm going to go out and get food. Ruth was looking for opportunities that while you're stuck in your grief and while you don't know where to go, and even while she had said some very discouraging things that we'll get to here in a moment, Ruth said, I'm going to take this opportunity. Here's a way I can help. I'm going to go get you some food. I'm going to go and make sure that the household is taken care of. And that's one example. I'm sure she did plenty of cleaning and everything else that she could do to help. But here was one way that we have an example of that Ruth said, okay, I found a way that I can help, so I'm going to do it. And Naomi responds in the very end of verse 2. She said to her, go, my daughter. You found a way that you can help. You found something that you can do to help in the midst of my grief and my mourning, so go. Sometimes that's the best that we can do, is just find something simple. It doesn't have to be a grand gesture. It doesn't have to be an eloquent speech. It doesn't have to be all the perfect right things to do. It's, hey, I found something that you need. I found something simple that I can do, so I'm going to go and do it. Those are just some of the best ways that we can help to comfort others. I wish that I could be up here and tell you there's an easy answer, that I have X, Y, and Z to make it perfect and make it right, but I don't. It's not there. Everyone's going to deal with it differently, but we can be there, and there are examples that we find, and I think Ruth and Naomi are a great example of here are some things that we can do. Some of the rest of it's going to have to be left up to time and left up to the individual that is really suffering the loss right now. We talked about some good attitudes of Naomi. Naomi also had a couple bad attitudes. And I'm not going to be perfect, and I'm not going to stand up here and say when I've gone through grief and I've gone through suffering that I've been perfect either. I've said things that I regret and I can't take back. I've done things and pushed people away that I shouldn't have done. Grief sometimes brings out the worst in us. But there's attitudes that still need to be remembered by the people who are going through grief. And there are attitudes and patience that need to be remembered by those of us that are trying to help them go through grief. That yes, Naomi is trying to push her daughter-in-laws away, but Ruth and Orpah didn't take that personally. They understood she's going through a hard time, so we're just going to be here the best we can. Naomi said some things that were not the best beginning in verse 10. And they said to her, surely we will return and go with you to your people. But Naomi said, turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there still sons in my womb that they may be your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go, for I am too old to have a husband, if I should say I have hope. If I should have a husband tonight and should also bear you sons, would you wait for them until they are fully grown? Would you restrain yourselves from having husbands? No, my daughters, for it grieves me very much. For your sakes, for the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. You look at it in a certain way, Naomi has just said some very bitter and evil things to her daughter-in-laws. In some ways, she has just insinuated that the only reason you are here with me and that you show me love is that we can fulfill Jewish law that my next sons should take you on as their husbands so that they should give you children and continue the family lineage. Well, I don't even have a husband. I'm probably well past childbearing age. Even if that's the case, if I have children today, would you restrain yourselves from having husbands until they're fully grown? There's no point for you to stay around me. There's no reason for you to stay with me. I'm not going to bear any more sons. There's not going to be any more husbands coming from my loins for you. Just go ahead and go. There's no reason for you to stay. Now, that can be taken to a very evil and bitter place. That can be taken in a very harmful and hurtful way. And in no ways does this excuse some of the things that Naomi just said. We have to remember, I can't push other people away. I can't let bitter and evil words come out of me when I'm going through loss, when I'm dealing with hard times. It's not her daughter-in-law's fault that she lost her husband and she lost her sons. But at the same time, there's also, again, something back on us that Ruth and Orpah just kind of took this in stride. They understood she's hurting. She's upset. She thinks that the only reason, even though she knows it's not true, and I know enough about Ruth and Orpah by the context here that this wasn't why they were sticking around. Even though they knew this wasn't true, and this probably wasn't like Naomi, how they knew her for the last decade, she's hurting. She's upset. We're going to still keep saying, we're going to come with you. We're going to cling to you. We're not going to leave you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. They didn't part on bitter terms because Naomi just said something kind of nasty and kind of hurtful. They still continued to show love. They didn't part on evil ways because one of the last things that Naomi said to her daughter-in-laws was, "The hand of the Lord has gone out against me." I know this at least is the case with Ruth. I don't know about Orpah, but I know at least it's the case with Ruth. Ruth is not a follower of God if it was not for Naomi, her husband, and her sons. The Moabites were ungodly, idolatrous people. I'd say in all likelihood, Ruth even only came to know who Jehovah was because, in part, due to Naomi. And the husband that she chose, and the children that she raised and helped to teach and rear, and probably some in the attitude that she's seen in Naomi for the last 10 years. Now imagine, and some of you may be able to imagine this all too well because you may have seen it for yourself, some of the people that have helped teach you and shape you in the gospel and in knowing God, turning around and blaming God for all the evil that has happened to them. I can tell you from experience that is an earth-shattering and hard thing to hear. To me, I think that's almost more heartbreaking than telling them that I don't have anything for you, you might as well leave, I'm not going to give you anything else. Naomi has just said something that's very evil and very wrong. It's also very hard, I imagine, for Ruth and Orpah to hear. But still, they were patiently loving and insistent. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you stay, I will stay. Your God shall be my God. That just because you've said something in the moment that you're blaming God for the loss and for the evil that has come upon you, Ruth is saying, I know you better than that. I know that while you're bitter right now, as we see by the time we get down to verse 19, and while you are bitter with God right now, this is not the same Naomi that she has known all her life. Beginning in verse 19 of Ruth chapter 1, now the two of them went until they came to Bethlehem, that being Ruth and Naomi. And it happened when they had come to Bethlehem that all the city was excited because of them, and the women said, "Is this Naomi?" But she said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara," which means bitter. For the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord has brought me home again empty. Why do you call me Naomi, since the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me? So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab. Now they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. That's an introduction back home. Here's a woman and her family that left, that was friends and neighbors to many of them. And she's come back left with a name that meant pleasant, and came back with a name that means bitter. And some of the first words out of her mouth were, "Don't call me Naomi, call me bitter, for God has dealt bitterly with me." The first thing that you see, I can't even imagine, as a neighbor and as a friend or as a loved one that you haven't seen in about a decade, is to see that they're bitter and angry with God that they come back. I don't imagine that endeared her too well to her old friends and neighbors. Naomi's a great example there of the wrong things that said and the wrong attitude that was taken. And still, even in spite of all of this, who's sticking with her? Ruth the Moabitess came back with her. Her daughter-in-law stayed by her side. She kept true to her word. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. I'm going to help you. I'm going to be beside you however I can. But there's an important message that begins in Ruth chapter 1 and ends in Ruth chapter 4. And that is that the suffering and the loss doesn't have to stay that way. The bitterness doesn't have to be there forever. There are many wonderful things that, while Naomi acknowledged this in the beginning of Ruth chapter 1, that good things were coming upon the Jews while she had been away, the famine had been taken care of, God had blessed them with bread, everything was going well back home. She really fully acknowledges by the time of Ruth chapter 4 that after the love story between Ruth and Boaz and the faith and the patience and love that Ruth has shown, here it is in Ruth chapter 4, that Naomi realizes, hey, this isn't the end. There are still blessings. God is still with me. God is still with my family. Good has still followed even after dark and bitter times. Ruth chapter 4, beginning in verse 14. And the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a close relative. May his name be famous in Israel. May he be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is better to you than 7 sons, has borne him." Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her bosom and became a nurse to him. And the neighbor women gave him a name, saying, "There is a son born to Naomi." And they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse and the father of David. Here, even though Satan has been at her gates, Satan has tempted her with bitterness and wormed his way in to a little extent, who caused great burden and loss to come upon Naomi, good still came about. Blessings still came later. That as much as it may seem sometimes that the world comes to a complete halt and that nothing good can ever come again, after loss and sorrow and pain, no, blessings can still come. God can still be with you. Naomi tried to change her name to mean bitter and leave a legacy of being bitter with God, and I think to some extent she wanted to die a bitter old woman angry with God. And look at the legacy that is left for her in the Bible. It is one who has been able to overcome grief, and that God has proven that while you may try to leave me, I'm still going to remind you that I'm here. That I'm still going to help surround you with people to help you in the times of your greatest need. And that no matter how dark it may seem, no matter how large the storm may be, and insurmountable the grief might be in the moment, good and blessings and times of refreshing can and will still come. That it's never the end. In the case of faithful loved ones that we've even lost here recently, the words of David always ring in my mind at every funeral that I preach at and visit of a faithful brother or sister in Christ. They can't come back to me. I won't see them again here on this earth. They're gone. But now he is dead. Why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he will not return to me. Even no matter how bleak it may be today when we lose loved ones, especially of those that are faithful, there is a hope. Not only that God is still working with us here in this life and good things can still come, there is a hope in an eternity that is coming very soon. That if they were as faithful as we believed them to be, and if I work and remain faithful today, I can see them again. I can be with them in heaven for an eternity where I never have to say goodbye again. where Satan can never separate us, where death and pain and suffering and loss will be a distant, distant memory in the scope of eternity. In the case of some loved ones that we've lost here even in the last 6 months, it's goodbye for now. For some that we've known for decades, even as spouses and loved ones that we've known better than just about anyone here on this earth, there's a promise that as much as I knew you now, there's a greater friendship and love and closeness that we're going to get to enjoy in eternity. 20, 30, 50, 70, 80 years is going to look like a blink of an eye when I get to be with them and my God for all of eternity. This suffering, this pain will come to an end. And there are wonderful blessings yet awaiting. We've not talked about really how to become a Christian this morning, but if there is someone here that needs to become one, you have this opportunity. If you become a Christian, you do have the promises and some touchings of things that we touched on this morning, that there are blessings here in this life that God will work with you. That God will help you, whatever you are suffering through, whatever you have gone through, whatever sin is in your life, it is not too great that God cannot help. He wants to help, and so do we. If you are not a Christian this morning and you need to take advantage of that opportunity, come forward. Confess Christ as your Savior. Give your life over to Him. Be baptized for the remission of your sins. And start a new life. Start a better life where you can serve Him with whatever time you have on this earth. If you're here this morning and you are like Naomi at the end of Ruth chapter 1, you've let bitterness and sin and Satan overwhelm you, that you have lost sight of the God that you have worshipped in times past. You have lost sight of the faith and that confession that you made maybe decades ago to be a Christian. It's not too late. You can still be forgiven. You can still make things right. Don't let today pass by. It may be your last chance. Take advantage of the opportunity this morning, either praying to God and asking for forgiveness or coming forward and confessing those things, and making it right. Return to God and let Him bless you and let us help you. Whatever the case may be this morning, if the need calls for it, please come forward right now as together we stand and sing the song that has been selected.